So this is the fifth sermon in our adventure through the Old Testament to the birth of Jesus, where we get the opportunity to look at how the Old Testament develops to the birth of Jesus. And it's a good opportunity to read it from a different lens than we traditionally do. Because when we make the resurrection the point of our life, which it should be, we have the tendency to read these passages in the Old Testament as if the birth of Jesus has already happened. And it's very much a world where Jesus has not arrived yet. Jesus changes things about humanity. And this is God setting the stage for Jesus to appear. And sometimes we read passages in the Old Testament, like last week, that just seem barbaric and awful. Why would God do this? But when you strip the resurrection from that scene, because people who don't believe in the resurrection or who don't know about it yet are still getting things from these passages. I call this the Back to the Future 2 effect. You know, at the end of Back to the Future 2, Doc gets struck by lightning and goes back to the Old West. And then he sends a Western Union to Marty McFly. And it's like 30 seconds later, after he disappears to Marty, a guy pulls up from Western Union, is like, we've had this message for like 100 years. We've looked at it, but now we're curious to see what it says. I promise you, this is the bedrock of the Old Testament. Genesis is where we're going through right now. It's their last time through Genesis. They were not reading this saying, man, we cannot wait till the year 30 CE so that we can know what this means. That's not what's happening. They got stuff out of it. And when we look at it from that angle, when we strip that resurrection thing that automatically informs how we read it away, it gives us a new appreciation of what Jesus is doing when Jesus does show up on the scene. We looked at that last week with Abraham and Isaac, when God basically asks Abraham to murder his son, right? We all agreed that that would be morally wrong, and yet God still asked him to do it. And we got to chew a little bit. When you chew on stories like that, you really can see a deeper substance. The Old Testament is largely meditation literature. When we meditate on the Old Testament, and not just as individual passages, but as passages that are all linked to one another, it really will resonate and leave residual effects in our thinking, and we will begin to see a bigger picture. So today, I don't want to look at Isaac and Abraham again. They are in this sermon because we're going all the way through the book of Genesis today. We're going to look at another theme where we see that God is not just morality before. We see God is not just somebody who's checking his list and making a list and checking it twice and trying to see if we're naughty or nice, you know. But he's not Santa Claus, right? I mean, he sees us when we're sleeping and we're awake, right? But when you think of your relationship with God, does it go beyond your need to not be naughty? Is God asking more of you than just being nice? What is God doing with your life? Do you believe that God is doing something with your life? Trying to accomplish something? I think it's good to reflect on this. Whether you know the answer to this question or not, there's no shame involved at all. When you look back at your last week, do you feel like God accomplishing something in your life? This is a good question to ask for sure. What did God accomplish in your life last week? So we get to look through the book of Genesis to see God accomplishing things through basically a family that spans, I don't know, 40 generations. I don't know if it's 40. I didn't add them up. But we serve a God that wants to do something with us. Everybody's over here, so I'm like staring everybody down. Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." So the Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." So when I read this passage, I used to just think that this refers to Jesus. And clearly it does refer to Jesus, because Jesus clearly gets bit by the snake, right? But he also crushes the snake's head. But I want to suggest to you that it's not just Jesus that is crushing the head of the serpent. Now, Jesus will deliver the decisive blow to the serpent, but that enmity between the serpent and Eve's offspring is in full effect throughout the book of Genesis. We see it show up immediately in their children, their first children, where Cain murders Abel because Abel provided a better sacrifice. That actually informed our coffee decision this week recently, because we ran out of Daylight Blend coffee, and my brother was at home today, and he said, "Should I bring Folgers or should I bring Dunkin' Donuts coffee for the church?" And I thought, I don't want to be Cain, so bring the Dunkin' Donuts, right? The Dunkin' Donuts is a better sacrifice for the Lord, and we want God to honor our gifts, right? But so Cain gets a little bit jealous, right? He gets a little envious, and the serpent wins in Cain's life because Cain murders his brother and then gets cast off. So the serpent is winning until the Lord brings Seth into the world. I named my son because of the hope that I get when I read that passage. Through Seth, humanity survives its battle with the serpent. And then it zooms forward a little bit all the way to Noah. And by the time of Noah, there's not a whole lot of righteousness in the world. Violence has escalated, right? The serpent is dominating the world. But God gives Noah an ark, helps him build an ark, and he closes the door and he floods the earth, and Noah overcomes this. He moves on into the future generations, the generations of Eve that are going to crush the head of the serpent. And then Noah has 3 sons named Shem, Ham, and Japheth. when you read it, like Japheth feels like Peggy of the Schuyler sisters when you're watching Hamilton, right? It's just Eliza and Angelica that really matter, right? Japheth has some descendants that matter, but it's the descendants of Shem that get to move on in the promise, right? Because Ham does some bad stuff. It's so bad that we don't even really know for sure what it is, right? The Bible uses this euphemism where Noah gets hammered, right? And he passes out, and Ham goes in there and gazes upon him naked. And then his brothers cover him with a sheet. Now, the Bible is not puritanical about stuff at all. This gaze upon somebody naked thing is believed to be a euphemism for something else. There's debate about this. Did he rape his dad? Did he castrate his dad? There's at least two other massive rape scenes in Genesis that it's kind of this is not going to be the theme of the sermon, but that become very, very important though, because Ham does this disgraceful thing to his dad, and because of this, he becomes cursed. Now, Ham has four important descendants. Let me go over here to, here we go. I'm going through this fast, guys. So the sons of Ham were Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. A whole lot of enemies come from this lineage here. Cush is the father of Nimrod. Nimrod is the leader of Babylon, builds the Tower of Babel. Obviously, they have some problems with Egypt. We'll start getting into that next week. Putites are everywhere from time to time, and then they're going to invade Canaan. They're going to take their land from them. And out of that group actually comes the Philistines too. So because of this battle, because of this egregious action by Ham that we don't really fully understand, enemies of Israel are born. Not too much longer, they go into Sodom and Gomorrah, and that's one of the other scenes. And then immediately after it comes another one where Lot is passed out drunk and his daughters have sex with him. And it leads to the creation of more enemies of Israel, like the Moabites. Yeah, Israel really does not like their enemies, right? All of them are products of incest, right? And horrible incest, right? That's what the story tells. So we see evil proliferating through the line of Ham. Now, Japheth has his own descendants, like Gog and Magog are descendants of Japheth, and that shows up in the Old Testament. It shows up in our, like, we'll just say it shows up in Revelation, right? At the very end, the battle between Gog and Magog and the people of God. But Shem's people thrive. Shem's descendants are called the Semites. When you think of anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish people, anti-people who live through the line of Shem. And so there's this nonstop battling between the people God has chosen and the people God has not chosen. And there's really only one time in Genesis where this battle does not take place. And you see it in Shem's descendant, Abraham, because it follows Shem's descendants down to Abraham. I believe it's like 7 generations. Abraham is going to be the nation that prospers in the world, which means he should be entitled to whatever he chooses. Yet he is willing to let his nephew Lot pick out his set of land first. Lot moves to Sodom, and God gives him Canaan. God honors Abraham's promise because Abraham is faithful. But the Bible starts to do something differently when we get to Abraham. When we look at these characters that come before Abraham, we have somebody who is right before God and somebody who's wrong before God, right? Cain's a murderer. Abel is not a murderer. Seth is not a murderer. Ham does some crazy stuff. Shem didn't. It's really easy to look at these characters as if they're black and white. There are those who are faithful and those who are not. And it's easy to see it that way when you're looking at it from an aggregate level. But with Abraham, the Bible begins to zoom in a little bit. And you can't just look at Abraham and say, he's faithful, this guy's not. Because Abraham might be willing to approach land in the way that David approaches his kingship. He knows he's anointed, but he's not going to kill Saul to get it. But that stuff still goes on in his life, doesn't it? He may trust God with the land, but he doesn't trust God to give him a son. And his wife doesn't trust him to give him a son. So they go down and they acquire some people, which is weird, but they acquire some servants. And then Hagar gets to have sex with Abraham. Once again, she doesn't have the ability to consent in this situation. It's terrible. But she gets pregnant with Ishmael. And immediately after Sarah convinces Abraham to do this, she gets jealous and then she becomes threatened. She's like, oh, wait a minute. She's the only one that's able to produce an heir to Abraham. So she begins to be cruel to Hagar, and Hagar gets pushed out. Now she comes back for a little bit, but then they end up having Isaac after all. It's kind of weird how Abraham's life is not nearly as linear when you zoom in a little bit. Abraham is willing to hand his wife over to a king because he doesn't want that king to kill him. He even pretends that she's not his wife. I think he does it twice. Abraham might be counted as righteous because he believed God about the land. But Abraham is not just this white figure. And we see the same thing happening in his son Isaac. Isaac hands his wife over. Not my wife. Do whatever you want. Sorry. Right? And then that's when the Bible gets real weird, right? Like, I kept on thinking of those old mug root beer commercials, where they're like, that's thick-headed, right? Because Jacob inherits the birthright to his dad Isaac because he convinces Esau to do it for a bowl of soup, and which is stupid, right? Who would do that, right? Then I guess Esau kind of reneged on the deal a little bit. So he's like, I need to get it. So I'm going to put on a bunch of hair. I'm going to walk in, and my dad's going to walk in there and be like, oh, Harry, yes, yes, I know that you're Esau, and therefore you get my birthright. And somehow people treat this like it's a conclusive deal. But it does. Maybe there's stuff I don't understand. But then Jacob, who does some deceiving, gets a little bit of deception his own way, right? He has to run away from Esau, and he meets this beautiful girl named Rachel. It is Rachel, right? Rebecca's his mom, right? I get them mixed up every time. So, and an hour later, I won't remember. So Rachel, she's beautiful enough that he's willing to work 7 years so that he can acquire her, right? I don't care. I'm just saying it. I'm just reading it for what it is. So he gets to marry Rachel. He goes to the wedding. And then afterwards, he's like, crap, I married Leah. I married the wrong woman. That's really stupid, right? He's not any smarter than his dad, right? He's like, well, she's a woman. I can tell she's a woman. She's got a womanly figure, so I'll marry her. And then somehow this is conclusive. He's married to Leah. Poor Leah gets given away as property to this guy that doesn't even really want her. He's like, you know what? I'll take you. But I'm going to work another 7 years for your sister who's prettier. And he does. And he marries her. And then, because Rachel's so much prettier than Leah, he favors her children over Leah's. Now, Leah produces more kids, but Rachel's are favored. But here's something that's interesting to me. We see a God who allows the inheritance of his storyline to be forwarded through deception. It's through deception that Jacob gets the promised land. And it's through deception that we end up getting Jesus. Because Jesus is not a descendant of Rachel. He's a descendant of Leah. It's through Leah that we get Judah. And Jesus is from the tribe of Judah. Isn't it weird that God allows that kind of thing to happen? In your life, can you think of a time when you did the right thing, and because you did the right thing, everything worked out for you? This is usually something you're really proud of, right? You sacrificed for something. You did something that not everybody else would have done. And because of that, you ended up rewarded. But can you think of a time when you did the right thing and because of that, you suffered incredibly? You did the right thing, and doing the right thing did not bring about benefit to your life. Potentially brought some damage to you and your goals. How about when you do the wrong thing? I'm sure you can think of a time when you did the wrong thing and that brought about some nasty consequences. But what about a time when you did the wrong thing and it brought about some kind of good consequences? Are you benefiting in any way in your life because of something that you did that was underhanded or bad? Kind of messed up, but everybody here does. We're all all underhanded in some ways, or we all have been underhanded, and we've all benefited from it. So the beginning of Genesis is people doing bad things and getting cast off or drowned, and other people later on doing wrong things and benefiting greatly. God's not a moral machine. Your actions do not necessarily mean that you're going to get exactly what you want. And it's likely that sometimes underhanded actions are going to benefit you more than overhanded. They're going to benefit you more than upright actions. So what does that mean about your conduct in the future? Does it mean anything? Does your decision-making matter? Even if it was a 50-50 thing, that's pretty contrived. It's not 50-50. I want to suggest to you that it really does matter. Because if you think, I think it was last week, we were talking about the Gilgamesh epic and the humans being real noisy. And I talked about this hypothetical scenario where the fireworks are going off at 2 o'clock in the morning and everybody's outside drinking Beast Light, making me angry, right? My baby was crying in the story. My dog's peeing on the floor and I'm bottle feeding and doing this at the same time, trying to clean up. And I get mad and I go outside and I punch my neighbor. I beat my neighbor up, which is an escalation because he's being a jerk and I'm being a bigger jerk. And then 4 years later, his kids egged my house. Because as we sin doesn't just level out. It only escalates and turns into something that is truly disgusting. Because that small story is happening on a global level. And we're not just here to maximize our own personal gain. If we are here only looking out for number one, the only thing that ends up winning is the serpent. In your life, you are living a story that is supposed to crush the head of the serpent. Because Jesus does come and he delivers this decisive blow. But he does it so that we can join in on that. It's in his forgiveness that we get to participate in this story that deals with human sin, humans' lack of trust in God, and eventually human prosperity. What does it look like for you to be part of something that is there to crush the head of the serpent? Do you see yourself in collaboration with God in this? Sometimes when you look at the story, all the person does is survive. Sometimes they do great things. But it's because of what Jesus does that we end up fully winning. Our lives get really, really complicated. When you follow the rest of the line, Jacob is massively favoring his sons Joseph and Benjamin over the rest of the tribes. And because of that, Joseph becomes a spoiled brat, right? He comes out there in his Technicolor coat from Abercrombie or whatever, I don't know. He comes out there and he's bragging about it. Meanwhile, everybody else is like covered in dirt because they've been farming. And he brags about it. He says, I think you guys are all going to be under my rule when I'm older. I saw a dream, so just get used to it now because it's going to be actually worse later on. And so they do what anybody does, right? They throw him in a pit and sell him to slavery, right? That's what Big Brothers is supposed to do, right? No, that's too far. Especially them. He ends up in Egypt where this woman tries to seduce him and he doesn't do it. So she accuses him of attacking her because this is a woman scorned, right? He goes to jail. Where in jail, because he can interpret dreams, he gets to interpret the dream of the Pharaoh. And because he can interpret the dream of the Pharaoh puts him as second in charge of England, yes, of Egypt. He's in charge of Egypt. And then he's able to save his family line. Because he was sold into slavery, went to jail, and because his dad favored him and because he was a jerk. Kind of crazy. So, what can you take from that? I just want to suggest to you that your behavior is extremely important, but it's just not nearly as important as the faithfulness of God. God is faithful to us. But it doesn't necessarily feel like he's really faithful to us when we're doing the right thing and our plans aren't being fulfilled. Our goals aren't being met. Can God be faithful to you while not giving you the biggest desires of your heart? Don't take this in a toxic direction. If you are struggling with what I just said, then we need to talk about it because that, boy, oh boy, you can get that could get toxic. But what is the nature of God's faithfulness? If he's not a moral machine, if he's not Santa Claus, what is he faithful to? He's faithful to humanity's conquest over the serpent, which leads us into horrific sin and terrible misery. He is faithful to that project. And hopefully you find yourself able to be faithful to him, regardless of how it ends up turning out in your life. Because there is literally nothing in your life that's better than that relationship with him. That's why you have to lose yourself in order to find it. Because when you give everything to the Lord, he's going to give you a life that you might not have chosen for yourself, but it will be glorious. You will find yourself on the inside in alignment with the reason that the whole world exists. And there is nothing in the world worth losing that. Everything else, is it window dressings? Is that the thing? I think I just understood what that means now. Like, everything else is secondary. your inner health, your spiritual well-being. If that doesn't make sense, I'd like to talk to you about it. But in the meantime, we're going to celebrate that Jesus did deliver a decisive blow to the serpent. And I don't know how I just preached through an entire book of the Bible. It was kind of weird.